Brad Garlinghouse sat down on CNBC this week, and in one interview, he confirmed three things that every XRP holder needs to understand. 1. Ripple moved $16 trillion last year. 2. Almost none of it used a digital asset. 3. He used the words black swan on live television. If you watched the Gold Series video this week, you know what the machine looks like. Today, we talk about what happens when the machine turns on. This is the silent migration. Let's start with the $16 trillion number, because it's easy to hear a number that big and tune out. So let me make it concrete. $16 trillion is roughly the size of the entire US economy, gross domestic product, in 1 year. That is the volume of payments that flowed through Ripple's infrastructure in 2025, not XRP transactions, payment volume. This came partly through acquisitions, specifically Ripple Prime, which alone clears trillions annually. The key detail, and this is what Garlinghouse actually said, is that almost none of that $16 trillion routed through a digital asset. He framed that gap as Ripple's opportunity. Think about what that means. Ripple already has the clients. It already has the volume. It already has the infrastructure. It doesn't need to go find $16 trillion in new business. It just needs to migrate the $16 trillion it already touches onto on-chain rails. That is the silent migration. Now, here's the second thing Garlinghouse confirmed. Ripple is targeting $1 billion in recurring operating income by the end of 2026. And he was very specific about one thing. That number does not include any XRP holdings or token sales, not XRP on the balance sheet, not XRP profits, pure operating revenue from software, infrastructure, payments, custody, and brokerage services. Let me explain why this matters. For years, the knock on Ripple has been the company's revenue depends on selling XRP. When XRP price drops, Ripple's business suffers. That argument is now structurally broken. Ripple is building a classic fintech business. Software fees, infrastructure licensing, prime brokerage revenue, treasury management contracts. This is the model that gets companies like PayPal and Fiserv valued at 5 times to 10 times revenue multiples. If Ripple hits $1 billion in operating revenue and maintains that independently of XRP price, it becomes a fundamentally different kind of company in the eyes of institutional capital. And that matters for XRP because institutional capital doesn't allocate to ecosystems built on shaky foundations. A Ripple with $1 billion independent revenue base is a Ripple that institutional treasury desks can take seriously without a compliance conversation about token dependency. The foundation is being built to hold weight. Now let's talk about the black swan comment. First, what is a black swan? The term comes from finance and risk theory. A black swan is an event that is unexpected, has massive impact, and seems obvious in hindsight. The 2008 financial crisis was called a black swan, COVID's market impact, the dot-com collapse. Black swans aren't necessarily bad events. They're simply events that markets didn't price in. And when they arrive, the repricing is sudden and severe. When Garlinghouse uses that language on live television in the context of XRP and on-chain migration, he is not saying XRP will go up. He is saying the market is not correctly pricing what happens when a $16 trillion pipeline starts migrating on-chain. And if he's right, when that migration begins, the repricing won't be gradual. It will be sudden. Let's think about the mechanics of this. Right now, the XRP price is at approximately $1.04. Exchange reserves are at a 7-year low of 1.7 billion XRP. XRP spot ETFs pulled in $131 million in May, their strongest month of the year, even as Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs saw outflows. The market is accumulating while the narrative is negative. That's exactly the setup that precedes a nonlinear repricing event. Not a guarantee, but a setup. Section 4, the 3 switches, what actually triggers the migration. Tone, honest and analytical. This section maintains credibility by not overclaiming. Now here's the honest part. The $16 trillion doesn't migrate automatically. There are 3 specific conditions that need to align. We covered this in the Gold Series video, but they're worth repeating here because this is where most XRP commentary gets it wrong. Switch 1, ODL scaling. On-demand liquidity is the Ripple product that actually requires XRP as the bridge asset in cross-border payments. It processed $1.2 billion in Q1 2026, up 45% year over year. Only 40% of Ripple's 300 plus banking partners currently use it. If that 40% becomes 60%, XRP demand scales proportionally. The bottleneck is not technology, it's liquidity depth in new corridors. Trident Digital is building a $500 million dedicated XRP liquidity pool, targeting African corridors by mid 2026. When deep liquidity exists in a corridor, more partners choose ODL over RLUSD for cross border settlement. Switch 2, RLUSD moving to XRPL. Right now, 76% of RLUSD supply sits on Ethereum. Ripple executives have publicly said they expect XRPL to eventually overtake Ethereum for RLUSD volume. If even a third of RLUSD migrates to XRPL, say, that's hundreds of millions in stablecoin liquidity flowing through the ledger, generating transaction fees paid in XRP, and making XRPL a more attractive settlement environment for everything else. The RLUSD migration to XRPL is the internal catalyst that doesn't depend on legislation. Switch 3, Clarity Act. This is the external legislative trigger. The Clarity Act passed the Senate Banking Committee 15-9 on May 14, 2026. What it does, federally classifies XRP as a commodity, removes the legal liability that has prevented pension funds, insurance companies, and regulated banks from holding XRP directly on their balance sheets. Without it, these institutions can use Ripple's infrastructure all they want, but they route through RLUSD because XRP's legal status creates compliance risk. With it, the $153.8 million Goldman Sachs position in XRP ETFs becomes a footnote compared to what regulated institutional capital could allocate directly. Congress has a narrow window before August recess. These three switches don't need to flip simultaneously, but when two of them flip at once, that's the nonlinear moment Garlinghouse is describing. Here is the XRP reality audit take on all of this. The infrastructure is real, the deals are real, the volume is real. $16 trillion is not a forecast. It already happened. Ripple already moves it. The question is not if the silent migration is possible. The question is timing and routing. Garlinghouse named the black swan because the market is pricing this as a gradual adoption story, and he's suggesting it may not be gradual. When regulatory clarity arrives, when ODL liquidity deepens, when RLUSD starts migrating to XRPL at scale, the institutions that have been watching from the sidelines don't slowly allocate. They move capital. And when institutional capital moves, it moves fast. That's what a black swan repricing looks like, not a coin going from $1 to $2. A system repricing what a bridge asset is worth when it's routing a $1 trillion pipeline. Watch the three switches, not the daily price. This channel exists to audit the reality of XRP, not to sell you a dream and not to dismiss what's actually being built. The silent build is done. The silent migration has a named catalyst, a $16 trillion pipeline, and a CEO who just used the words black swan on national television. Your job as a holder is to understand the mechanics, not react to the noise. If this breakdown was useful, subscribe and hit the bell. The next video will track where the three switches are in real time. Drop your take in the comments. Where do you think the first switch flips?